Welcome to another explainer. Today, we are cracking open a massive linguistic time capsule to explore the mind-bending complexity of the Old Irish language. Spoken roughly between 600 and 900 CE, this wasn't just, an older flavor of modern Irish. It was a highly sophisticated literary language used by a society deeply rooted in law, poetry, and storytelling. It literally stands as the earliest substantial form of the Irish language that we have extensive written records for. So picture this. It's the early Middle Ages. Latin is the undisputed heavyweight champion of Europe. It's the language of writing, religion, scholarship, the whole shebang. Why should we care about a native tongue spoken on an island at the very edge of the known world? Well, against all odds, while the rest of the continent was leaning on the legacy of Rome, the Irish were routinely writing down their own native, non-classical language, creating this unbelievably rich vernacular literature. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to hit the first Celtic vernacular, trace its journey from stones to manuscripts, explore a symphony of sounds, try to wrap our heads around some mind-bending grammar, look at deciphering the glosses, and finally dive into the legacy of Old Irish. All right, Section 1, the first Celtic vernacular and where it thrived. Old Irish wasn't just confined to Ireland. Obviously, it dominated the island, but it spread outward like wildfire. It was spoken in western Scotland through the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriada and over on the Isle of Man. But here is the really crazy part. It was carried by traveling Christian monks to monasteries across Britain and deep into continental Europe. Because of these wandering monks, Old Irish became one of the absolute earliest non-classical European languages to be routinely written down, beating out a lot of other European vernaculars by centuries. Moving on to Section 2, from stones to manuscripts, let's trace those deep ancestral roots. To really grasp this, we have to visualize the sheer, massive age of this lineage. Old Irish didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It belongs to the vast Indo-European language family. That means it shares a highly distant prehistoric ancestry with languages like Greek, Latin, and even Sanskrit, going way back to around 4500 BCE. It evolved through Proto-Celtic, morphed into something called Primitive Irish around 300 CE, and then, well, by 600 CE, it had undergone these rapid, radical changes to become the sophisticated Old Irish we're exploring today. But before they had books and vellum, you know what they used? Stones. The direct predecessor to Old Irish, that Primitive Irish we just mentioned, was largely recorded on standing stones. They used this totally unique script called ogam, which was basically just a series of lines and notches carved right along the edge of a rock. Most of these date from the 4th to 6th centuries, and they're mostly short memorial texts, saying things like Maki Mukoi, which means son of the tribe of. It's a very archaic form of the language, frozen in stone long before the intensely complex sound changes of Old Irish took over. Think about the massive technological leap happening here. We are going from carving notches on standing stones to Irish monks wrestling the sounds of their native tongue onto vellum using a foreign alphabet. And that was a huge problem because the Latin alphabet was incredibly unsuited for Celtic sounds. These monks only had a reduced alphabet of 18 letters, and they somehow had to use them to represent nearly 60 unique phonemes in Old Irish. It was a massive experimental puzzle to make those 18 letters do all that heavy lifting. Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, a symphony of sounds and their incredible consonant complexity. 45. That is the magic number here. Old Irish exploded from a basic prehistoric inventory of just 12 consonants into a massive 45 consonant phonemes. Imagine trying to keep track of that. This explosion was primarily driven by two prehistoric sound shifts, lenition and palatalization. Basically, consonants started shape-shifting based on the vowels surrounding them. You ended up with a crazy system where almost every single consonant existed in a broad form and a slender form. And this is where initial consonant mutations come into play, a total hallmark of Celtic languages. The very beginning of a word literally morphs depending on the grammar around it. So a basic word like ben, meaning woman, can suddenly change to mben, or cath, meaning battle, transforms into chath. And these aren't just random phonetic quirks. These mutations carry absolute vital grammatical information. They indicate possession, syntax, or relationships between words. Your words were constantly shifting at the front as you spoke. If you thought the sounds were wild, wait for Section 4, mind-bending grammar. Seriously, an absolute puzzle. Old Irish held onto a lot of the heavy, complicated morphology of its ancient Indo-European ancestors. We're talking 3 distinct genders and 5 separate grammatical cases. Instead of just leaning on little prepositions like we do in English, the actual endings of Old Irish nouns constantly shape-shifted to show what they were doing in a sentence. But get this, pay special attention to the numbers. Alongside singular and plural, Old Irish featured a highly unusual dual number. You used it specifically for pairs, like 2 hands or 2 eyes. How cool is that? And then there's the word order. An Old Irish sentence completely flips what we're used to in English. Instead of subject-verb-object, like the man carries the sword, Old Irish throws the action right to the absolute front. The literal translation is carries the man the sword, buried in fair in Clydib. This head initial verb first structure is a huge characteristic of the language, and it actually survives straight into modern Irish today. But the verbs, man, the verbs are where Old Irish truly goes off the rails. Get a load of the maximal verb. The verbal system was just incredibly complex. Semantic roots, subject endings, preverbs, conjunctions, pronominal infixes. They were all literally smashed together into one giant, highly inflected unit. This single, staggering word translates to a whole English sentence, with which he would not be able to collect us together. Native speakers just effortlessly generated these massive verbal complexes on the fly. It is completely mind-blowing. So, how on earth do we actually know all these hyper-specific rules today? That brings us to Section 5, deciphering the glosses and the miraculous survival of these texts. A gloss basically is a short note or translation. The real secret here? Our best evidence for Old Irish literally comes from the margins of other books. While Irish monks were diligently studying serious Latin texts, they casually scribbled their native Old Irish in the margins or between the lines just to help translate or explain the material to themselves. Without even realizing it, these monks inadvertently created a Rosetta Stone for modern linguists. It's a direct, unfiltered look at the language exactly as it was spoken and written in the 8th and 9th centuries. And they were incredibly prolific. We have over 16,000 of these glosses that somehow survived. Because of those wandering Irish missionaries we talked about earlier, a lot of these manuscripts were carried far away to continental monasteries, places like Würzburg, Milan, and St. Gall, where they just sat, perfectly preserved for centuries. Today, those 16,000 scribbled notes form the absolute foundation for every single modern grammatical description of classical Old Irish. They are the anchor that lets us decode everything else. Decoding all this scattered material has been a monumental academic undertaking. It literally took scholars over 60 years to publish the definitive dictionary of the Irish language. Talk about a passion project, right? It covers Old and Middle Irish all the way up to about the year 1700. This massive effort, which originally spanned about 2,500 printed pages, has thankfully been digitized into a fully searchable electronic database known as the EDIL. It is an absolute game changer for a whole new generation of scholars. Finally, let's look at Section 6, the legacy of Old Irish, and what it left behind. Naturally, a language couldn't maintain that immense, overspecified complexity forever. It's just too much. Between 900 and 1200 CE, the language relaxed a bit and transitioned into Middle Irish. That intensely complicated verbal system started to break down, unstressed final syllables dropped off, and the neuter gender vanished completely, just getting absorbed into masculine and feminine. This gradual shift, moving away from those giant smashed-together words to a simpler, more separated structure, eventually gave birth to the modern Gaelic languages we have today, Modern Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx. But the historical importance of this language cannot be overstated. Because it was recorded so early and with such tremendous grammatical detail, Old Irish stands shoulder to shoulder with the great classical languages. It acts as a massive foundational pillar for linguists who are trying to reconstruct the history of the entire Indo-European language family. Honestly, without Old Irish, our understanding of how languages evolve and our entire view of early medieval Europe outside the Latin sphere would be incredibly impoverished. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. How different might modern Europe look if this ancient, highly complex Celtic vernacular had become the dominant tongue instead of Latin? It's amazing to think that while the rest of the continent leaned heavily on the legacy of Rome, an island of monks was meticulously cultivating one of the most intricate languages the world has ever seen. I really hope this explainer has sparked a new curiosity in you to dive deeper into the incredible heritage of Old Irish. Thanks for hanging out with me.